The wedding guests never looked at the bride. They looked at the man in the wheelchair, the billionaire, silent, still, untouchable, and beside him stood a trembling young woman in a simple white dress, forced to marry a man she had never loved, and never even truly met. Her hands were cold, her heart was racing, and every person in that grand hall believed they already understood the story. A poor girl had been sold into a marriage. A disabled billionaire needed a wife. And both of them had lost. Then, just before the priest could continue, the billionaire turned his head slightly toward her and whispered something so quietly that no one else could hear it. "If you want to run, do it now." The young woman froze, because that was not what monsters were supposed to say. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. The man she had been taught to fear might be the only person in that room who wanted to save her. Her name was Elena Marquez. She was 20 years old, and until 3 weeks earlier, she had believed suffering came in small portions: a missed meal, a late rent payment, another lie from her father, another promise that things would get better. But suffering had many shapes, and sometimes it arrived wearing polished shoes and a lawyer's smile. Elena's father had once owned a small textile workshop on the edge of town. Years earlier, it had been enough to keep food on the table and medicine in the cabinet for Elena's mother, who died slowly from an illness no one in their neighborhood could afford to treat properly. After her mother's death, the workshop began to fail. Orders disappeared, machines broke, loans grew, and her father, who had once been stern but decent, became weak in all the worst ways. Weak for debt, weak for alcohol, weak for men who offered him quick money and slower ruin. Elena had grown up quickly. She learned to sew before she learned to rest. She learned to bargain before she learned to dream. And by the time she was old enough to understand how desperate their situation had become, she was already the one doing most of the work that kept the house standing. Still, she never expected what happened the night the black car arrived. It was raining, the roof was leaking again. Her father sat at the table staring at a contract he refused to explain. Across from him sat a man in a dark suit, older, expressionless, carrying the kind of calm that only came from money and legal power. Elena stood near the stove, her hands still wet from washing dishes, and asked the question that changed her life. "What is that?" Her father looked up too quickly. "Nothing that concerns you," the lawyer answered instead. "It concerns her completely." Her father shut his eyes as if he were already ashamed, but not ashamed enough to stop. The lawyer folded his hands and spoke with terrible politeness. "Mr. Marquez has debts." Elena laughed once, bitterly. "That's not news." "No," the lawyer said. But the creditors have changed. Elena's stomach tightened. Something in his voice felt arranged. Prepared. Dangerous. The lawyer continued. There is a solution available. One that protects your father, clears the debt, restores the property title, and secures your future. Elena looked from the man to her father. What solution? Her father finally spoke, and his voice was smaller than she had ever heard it. A marriage. For 1 second, she didn't understand. Then she did, and the room tilted beneath her. No, her father wouldn't meet her eyes. You don't understand. I understand enough. She backed away from the table. No. The lawyer remained calm. The man in question is respectable, extremely wealthy. His name is Adrian Vale. The name meant something. Everyone knew it. Adrian Vale was one of the richest men in the country, owner of Vale Holdings, hotels, shipping routes, private hospitals, land, power. And in the part that made the entire arrangement even darker, he is a widower, the lawyer said, and he requires a wife. Elena stared at him in disgust. Requires. The lawyer didn't flinch. He is prepared to be generous. Her father finally looked at her. Elena, we have no way out. That sentence broke something inside her. Not because it was cruel, because it was cowardly, because it was the voice of a man already surrendering his daughter to survive his own failures. She took one step toward him. You would sell me. Her father's lips trembled. It's not like that, but it was exactly like that. The lawyer slid the contract across the table. Think carefully. If this agreement is not accepted, the debt holders will proceed. Elena looked at the pages. Numbers, legal phrases, conditions, residence. Protection, financial settlement. One line stood out more than all the others. The marriage shall be valid immediately upon signing and ceremony. She looked back at her father. You agreed to this before asking me. He said nothing, and silence in that room was confession. For 3 nights Elena didn't sleep properly. She read the contract again and again, hoping to find some hidden escape, some flaw, some reason reality might still break in her favor. There was none. Her father had already signed his portion, and the creditor who now controlled their future was not a man ordinary people could fight. Adrian Vale's name opened doors, closed investigations, changed outcomes. Everyone knew that. No one said it loudly. On the 4th morning, the black car returned. This time, it brought her to the Vale estate. The mansion rose behind iron gates and old trees like something built to remind people how small they were. It was not simply large. It was distant, kind of wealth that did not want to be touched by the world outside. Elena expected arrogance, cold servants, a predatory old man in silk and gold. Instead, when she was led into the east drawing room, she found something else. A man by the window, in a wheelchair, still young enough to look dangerous, still handsome enough to be unsettling, but not old, not grotesque, not the kind of monster she had prepared herself for. Adrian Vale turned slightly when she entered. His suit was immaculate, his posture almost perfect from the waist up, his expression unreadable, and his eyes were not cruel. They were tired, deeply tired. The lawyer who had visited her home stood nearby. "Miss Marcus," he said, "Mr. Vale." Adrian said nothing at first. He simply looked at her with a seriousness that made her want to turn away, but she didn't. If she had been sold into this room, she would at least meet it standing up. Finally, Adrian spoke. "You weren't told much, were you?" His voice was low, even, controlled. Elena answered with more honesty than politeness. "I was told enough to know I had no choice." A faint shadow passed through his expression. He dismissed the lawyer with a glance. The man hesitated, then left the room. Now they were alone. Elena waited. Adrian turned his wheelchair slightly toward her. "They told you I asked for this marriage. You didn't." I paused. "No." Elena frowned. "Then why am I here?" Adrian looked back toward the window. "Because other people need me married." That answer raised more fear than comfort. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "that my family trusts paper more than love." Elena didn't fully understand, but she heard one thing clearly. There were people around him who wanted this marriage more than he did. Then why agree? For the first time, his calm cracked slightly. Because there are moments when refusing a trap only changes the room where it closes. Elena stared at him. There was intelligence in him, and something worse, resignation. Not weakness, exhaustion. She looked at the wheelchair, at the stillness of his legs beneath the blanket, and understood suddenly that whatever had happened to him, it had not only damaged his body, it had changed his place in his own house. He noticed her glance. "Car accident," he said. She looked up again. 2 years ago. His voice did not ask for pity. It cut it off before it could exist. "My wife died." "I didn't." The room went still. Elena swallowed. And for the first time since the contract appeared in her house, anger made room for something else. Not sympathy. Recognition. He had lost something too. Adrian watched her carefully. Then said the sentence that would stay with her for years. "If you want to leave before they force the ceremony, I won't stop you." Elena stared at him. "You could. I can still make some decisions. Would they let me go?" "No," he said honestly. And then after a pause, "But I would know you tried." That was when she first understood the strange truth. In a house full of people arranging her future, the man she was ordered to marry might be the only one who respected that she had none. The ceremony was held 6 days later. It was elegant in the way expensive things often are when they're hiding something ugly. White flowers, candles, string music, a hall full of people dressed beautifully enough to look moral from far away. Elena stood in a gown chosen by someone else, stitched by people who never asked if she liked it. She felt like a ghost wearing silk. At the far end of the aisle waited Adrian in his wheelchair, dark suit tailored perfectly, expression controlled. His sister, Verena Vale, watched everything with sharp eyes from the front row. His older cousin Thomas stood near the priest with the false softness of a man who preferred manipulating rooms over entering them directly. Elena had already learned their names, and she already distrusted both of them. The priest began. Words about union. Duty, blessing, sacrifice, all the usual decorations placed around a legal prison. Elena's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then, as the priest turned a page and the hall seemed to hold its breath, Adrian leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "If you want to run, do it now." She turned her head a fraction. "What?" His eyes remained forward. "You still have 3 seconds to choose scandal over surrender." For one wild moment, she imagined it. Running. Bare feet against the polished floors, voices behind her, cold air outside. Freedom that lasted maybe an hour before the world closed in again. But where would she go? Back to her father who had already sold her, into streets that ate women like her alive. She looked at Adrian again. He had given her a door. A real one, not because he wanted to escape, because he knew what it meant to be trapped. The priest asked for her answer. Elena felt everyone watching. She heard the rustle of expensive fabric, the silence of judgment, and she understood something brutal. Sometimes survival does not look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like endurance. "I do," she said. Adrian's answer came a breath later. "So do I." The room exhaled in relief. They called it a wedding. But what had actually happened was something far stranger. 2 prisoners had just been handcuffed to the same future. Elena expected her married life to begin with humiliation. Instead, it began with a locked door and an agreement. That night, Adrian asked her to come to the west sitting room rather than to the bridal suite prepared by the family. When she arrived, he was waiting near the fire. A document lay on the table. She stopped. Another contract. In a way, he gestured for her to sit. She didn't. Speak first. Something like approval flickered in his expression. "Good." He folded his hands. "You will have your own room." Elena frowned. "What? You heard me. Why?" "Because this marriage was imposed, and I won't pretend otherwise." She said nothing. Adrian continued. "No one enters your room without permission. Not staff, not family, not me." Elena looked at him carefully. What do you want in return? Honesty. That surprised her more than kindness would have. He nodded toward the paper. It states your allowance, legal protections, the property transferred to your name, and the conditions under which you can leave this house, if you ever choose to. She stared. You prepared this? Yes. Before the wedding? Yes. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because I knew what they were doing to you. Elena sat slowly. For the first time since her father signed that contract, her fear changed shape. Not gone, but altered. She picked up the paper. He had written safeguards into a life that no one else had offered. Income in her own name. Education, if she wanted it. Medical access for the future. A clause requiring his personal attorney to represent her interests independently from the Vale family. She looked up. Why would a man in your position do this for me? Adrian's gaze moved to the fire. Because no one did it for me. That sentence opened a silence between them that felt more intimate than any vow. Then Adrian added one final rule. In public, they will expect appearances. Elena understood. A united marriage. A calm household. A wife at his side. And in private, he looked at her directly. In private, I prefer truth. That was the beginning. Not of romance. Of trust. And in some houses, trust is the most dangerous emotion of all. The first person to test Elena was Verena. Adrian's sister moved through the estate like someone who already considered half of it hers. She was elegant, sharp, and incapable of speaking kindly unless kindness served a purpose. At breakfast, 3 days after the wedding, Verena smiled over her coffee and asked, "Are you adjusting well?" Elena had already learned to hear the blade beneath the silk. "I'm learning the house." Verena's smile widened. "Yes, it must be overwhelming." Thomas, seated nearby, added gently, "Especially for someone from simpler circumstances." Elena kept her expression still. "Walls are walls," she said. "Some are just better decorated." Thomas laughed. Verena did not. Adrian, across the table, hid his reaction behind a sip of tea. After breakfast, Verena cornered Elena in the gallery hallway. "You should remember something," she said softly. "This family existed long before you." Elena met her gaze, "And yet here I am." Verena stepped closer. "Do not mistake Adrian's unusual pity for power." That word, pity, landed badly. Elena felt anger rise, but she controlled it. "What exactly do you think I want from him?" Verena's expression chilled. "What every poor girl dragged into wealth wants," Elena answered with quiet precision. "An exit." For the first time, Verena looked uncertain, only for a second, but Elena saw it and stored it away. That evening, Adrian asked, "What did she say to you?" Elena hesitated. "You knew something happened." "I know, my sister." Elena looked out at the garden. She thinks I want your money. Adrian's response came dry and immediate. That makes one of you. Elena turned. He almost smiled. Almost. Then the humor faded. She and Thomas wanted this marriage for succession stability. The words were precise, corporate, almost clinical. Your condition, Elena said slowly, made them worried. Yes, you have no children. No, and now they do not know what to do with me. Adrian's eyes hardened. Good. For the first time, Elena saw anger in him. Not explosive, focused, controlled. And that was more dangerous. What exactly are they planning? She asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered honestly. If I die, they want the board to remain predictable. She understood. This marriage was never about companionship. It was strategy. A wife stabilized inheritance questions. A household image reassured investors. Even dying, Adrian had remained an asset to be managed. Elena looked at him carefully. You know they're waiting, yes, for you to get worse. He met her eyes. Yes. Something in her changed then. She had entered the house as a victim, but she was beginning to see the battlefield, and she was beginning to understand the man at the center of it. If the house belonged to power, the garden belonged to Adrian. It was the only place where his expression softened without effort. Rose paths, old stone benches, white camellias, a fountain that made the air feel cooler than the rest of the estate. One afternoon, Elena found him there, alone, staring at a patch of lavender moving in the wind. Did you plant this? She asked. My wife did, he said. The answer made her stop. She had known about the accident, but until that moment, his past had been a sealed room. Elena moved slowly around the chair and sat on the bench beside him. He did not ask her to leave. She loved order, he said after a while. Not the rigid kind, the living kind. He looked at the lavender again. She used to say gardens are proof that patience can look beautiful. Elena listened quietly. No one had told her how to speak to widowers. No one had taught her what to do with grief still living in a room. She sounds kind, Elena said. She was. The silence that followed was not empty. It was respectful. Finally, Adrian looked down at his legs. At first, after the accident, I thought losing her was the worst thing. His voice remained calm. Then I realized surviving without her was worse. Elena turned toward him fully. This was not confession for pity. It was truth offered carefully, like something fragile. Does it still hurt every day? She asked. Yes, the grief. He looked at her. The chair. That answer broke her heart more than anything he could have said about loss, because it exposed the deeper wound. Not that he had suffered, that he had been reduced by the world, by his family, perhaps even by himself. Without thinking, she said, "You are not the chair." Adrian said nothing. Then, very quietly, "I know." A pause. "Some days I forget." Something shifted between them after that. Not romance, not yet. Something more sacred. Recognition. She began joining him in the garden most afternoons. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Once she read aloud from a book because his headaches were bad. Another day he asked about her mother. She told him about the smell of soap on her hands, the song she hummed while mending dresses, the way poverty had never made her cruel. He listened as if those details mattered, as if Elena mattered. And no one, perhaps not even Elena herself, understood yet how healing it can be to be heard by someone who has no use for your performance. The real turning point came on a storm-heavy evening. Thunder rolled across the estate. Half the staff had retreated early. Elena was in the library when she heard the crash. Not loud, sharp. Wrong. She ran toward the sound and found Adrian near the west corridor, half fallen from the wheelchair, one hand gripping the armrest, the other braced painfully against the floor. His breathing was ragged. The chair had caught against a rug edge and twisted. For one horrifying second, she saw not a billionaire, not a husband, not a man everyone watched carefully, just a human being trapped in the humiliation of needing help. "Don't call anyone," he said immediately. She ignored the command and knelt beside him. "You're hurt." I said don't. His voice broke on the effort. Elena looked directly into his eyes. "Then let me help." Something like fear flashed there. Not of pain, of being seen like this. Of becoming weaker in front of yet another witness. She understood then why he had ordered privacy, why he had built rules around her room, around his dignity, around all the places where choice could still survive. Carefully, she slipped one arm behind his shoulders. "I'm not lifting your pride," she said softly, "just your weight." He stared at her. Then, against habit and resistance and every instinct of wounded pride, he let go. Together, they got him back into the chair. It took effort, breath, awkwardness, near failure, but when it was done, he looked at her as if she had done something more than help him sit. "You didn't ring for staff," he said. "You asked me not to." "Why?" Elena answered simply. "Because dignity matters when everything else is being taken from you." The storm outside broke fully then, rain lashing the windows. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, there was something in them she had not seen before. Trust. Not the polite version, the dangerous kind, the kind that changes fate. A week later, Elena overheard what she was never meant to hear. She had gone to the East office to return a ledger Mrs. Duarte had asked for. The door to the smaller conference room was half open. Inside, Verena and Thomas were speaking in low voices. Elena would have left, but then she heard Adrian's name. "The board will force medical transition if he declines again," Thomas said. Verena answered. Then it has to happen before she becomes a problem. Elena froze. She barely knows anything, Thomas continued. Not yet, Verena said, but he's changing. A pause. The doctors noticed. Thomas's tone sharpened. If his condition stabilizes, everything delays. The proxies, the restructuring, the asset movement. Verena exhaled. Then we make sure it doesn't. Elena felt her blood go cold. The ledger slipped slightly in her hand, and she had to clutch it tighter to stop the sound. She backed away before they could see her. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. That night, in the garden, she told Adrian everything. He did not look surprised, only tired. "How long have you known?" she asked. He looked at the fountain. "Since the 2nd month after the accident." Elena stared. "And you stayed?" "I couldn't walk. I couldn't prove enough." "And every move I made was watched." He turned to her. "Until you." The word landed heavily between them. She realized then what he meant. Her arrival had not only complicated their plans, it had changed his options. "What do we do?" she asked. For the first time since she had met him, Adrian's expression sharpened into something almost fierce. "We stop pretending I'm dying on their schedule." That began the war. Quietly, through lawyers Adrian trusted outside the family circle. Through documents he moved without Verena noticing. Through board members he contacted privately after years of distance. And through Elena, who now understood exactly why she had been brought into this house, not merely as a wife on paper, as a stabilizer, as a witness, as the one person in the room no one had taken seriously enough. Their greatest mistake. Love did not arrive in one dramatic moment. It came slowly, in shared silences, in tea left by the fire. In the way Adrian began asking whether Elena had eaten. In the way she learned to move the wheelchair over the gravel path, with just enough pressure to avoid jarring his spine. In the way he stopped hiding his pain from her, and the way she stopped hiding her fear. One evening, after the legal counterattack had already begun, and Verena's hostility had hardened into open coldness, Elena found Adrian in the music room. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. He was staring at an unopened piano. "My wife played," he said. Elena stood by the doorway. "You still keep it tuned?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because some forms of grief are really loyalty in disguise." Elena walked closer, then asked the question she had been carrying in silence for weeks. "Why did you protect me from the beginning?" He did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a man explaining arrangements. It was the voice of a man saying something true enough to hurt. Because I knew what it looked like when a person is cornered and still trying to remain whole. He looked up at her. "And because the first time I saw you, you looked at me like I was not already ruined." Elena felt her breath catch. She sat slowly on the piano bench across from him. "You weren't ruined." A sad smile touched his mouth. "You should have met me before the accident. I'm glad I didn't." That made him go still. Why? Because the man before the accident might have been stronger. She held his gaze. "But I don't think he knew how to love like this." The room went silent. And in that silence, something pure and undeniable finally took shape. Not gratitude, not dependence, not rescue. Love. The kind built not on fantasy, but on witnessing. On choosing each other after seeing the wounds clearly. Adrian's hand moved first, only slightly. Resting on the bench between them, Elena placed hers over it. No vows, no performance, no audience. Just two people who had both been used by the world in different ways, and had somehow become each other's safest place. The confrontation came 3 weeks later. Adrian requested a full board meeting at the estate. Not the family office, not the company tower. His house, his ground. Verena arrived furious. Thomas arrived smiling too carefully. Lawyers filled the room. Directors took their seats. Elena stood behind Adrian's chair, not hidden, not ornamental, exactly where everyone could see her. Adrian spoke plainly. He presented the evidence of attempted proxy manipulation, unauthorized asset movement, and illegal pressure applied through his supposed medical incapacity. He named names, produced records. And, most devastating of all, showed updated medical evaluations confirming that his condition had stabilized far beyond what Verena and Thomas had represented privately to the board. By the time the meeting ended, Thomas looked 10 years older. Verena looked ready to burn the room down. Both were removed from executive influence pending formal investigation. The directors who had once treated Adrian like a dying calculation now looked at him with something close to fear. Because the man they had quietly buried in their expectations was very much alive. That evening, after the lawyers left and the estate finally exhaled, Adrian asked Elena to come to the garden. Sunset lay warm across the lavender. The fountain whispered. The world felt, for one impossible moment, kind. Adrian turned his chair slightly toward her. This marriage began as violence. Elena's throat tightened. "Yes, but you turned it into sanctuary." She shook her head. "No." "We did." He looked at her for a long moment, then said what no one else had heard him say since his wife died. "Stay. Not because of contracts, not because of debt, not because you have nowhere else." His voice softened. "Stay because I love you." Elena cried before she answered, not because she was sad, because some forms of happiness arrive carrying the weight of everything they had to survive first. She knelt beside the chair, took his face in her hands, and kissed him gently. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I stopped being your wife on paper a long time ago." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I've been yours in every other way for weeks." The wind moved through the garden. The lavender bent and rose again. And for the first time in years, Adrian Vale did not feel like a man counting down the end of his life. He felt like a man finally living it. Epilogue. A year later, the newspapers no longer described Elena as the poor girl forced into marriage. They described her as the woman who rebuilt the Vale Foundation's medical outreach network in forgotten neighborhoods. The one who expanded access to rehabilitation centers. The one who placed dignity back into rooms where money had once tried to replace it. Adrian remained in the wheelchair. That part of the story did not change. And perhaps that was why the love mattered more. It was never built on miracle. It was built on truth, on loyalty. On two wounded lives meeting at the exact moment, both were being used by the world and choosing tenderness anyway. At sunset, they still sat in the garden together. Sometimes talking, sometimes silent, always enough, because the purest love had never come from being saved. It came from being seen clearly, and loved without being asked to become someone else's first.